Vextar stood before the great window of his ship and watched the small blue planet below. Earth, they called it. Such a simple name for what would become the most dangerous world in the galaxy. Not dangerous because of weapons or armies, but dangerous because of ideas. He had been a council member of the Dominion for 300 years. In that time, he had seen 1,000 worlds bow before their might. Some fought first, others surrendered immediately. All became part of their great empire in the end. Earth should have been no different. The Dominion had rules for first contact. They were simple rules that worked every time. Send a probe to show your power. Wait for the primitive beings to worship you or fear you. Then make them part of your empire. Easy. Vextar remembered that day 5 years ago when they first came to Earth. Their probe was beautiful, a crystal ship that glowed with energy and moved without any visible means of power. It appeared in Earth's sky above their largest cities. The humans should have fallen to their knees in fear or wonder. Instead, something unexpected happened. Within minutes, humans were pointing instruments at the probe. Not weapons, instruments to study it. Their radio waves filled with excited chatter. Scientists, they called themselves. They wanted to learn. G1 was the first human to speak to them. She worked at something called SETI, a group that looked for alien life. When the probe appeared, she did not run or hide. She pointed her radio telescope at it and began sending signals, not prayers or pleas for mercy. Mathematics. She sent the value of pi, then prime numbers, then simple equations. She was trying to talk. The probe's computer was programmed to respond to submission or aggression. It had no instructions for curiosity. Vextar had watched from his command ship as G1's signals reached the probe. The artificial mind inside. It tried to categorize her transmissions. Threat? No. Worship? No. What then? Commander, his communications officer had said. The primitive is attempting mathematical discourse. Mathematical discourse. In 300 years of conquest, no primitive species had ever tried to have a conversation with their probe. They either shot at it or built temples beneath it. Respond, Vextar had ordered. What else could he do? The probe sent back more, complex mathematics. G1's response came within hours. Not only had she solved the equations, she had improved them. She had found a more efficient way to express the same concepts. That was when Vextar knew they were dealing with something different. The first real contact came 3 days later. G1 had gathered a team of humans around her. There was Hyunwoo, who wore the uniform of their military but spoke of peace. There was Nari, who worked with languages and seemed to understand how communication itself worked. Instead of demanding to speak with their leaders, G1 had sent a simple message. We would like to meet you. We have questions. Questions, not demands or surrender. Questions. Vextar decided to meet with them himself. He took a small shuttle down to their world, landing in a field near where G1 worked. Standard procedure said to appear in glowing robes, to speak in booming voices to inspire awe. But when he stepped out of his shuttle, G1 was waiting with a smile and a cup of something called coffee. Hello, she said. I'm G1. Thank you for coming. She spoke as if he was a neighbor visiting for tea. Not a representative of a galactic empire. Not a being who could destroy her world with a thought. A neighbor. Hyunwoo stood beside her, alert, but not afraid. His hand did not rest on his weapon. Instead, he carried a tablet computer with translation software they had somehow built in 3 days. We hope we can be friends, Hyunwoo said through the translator. We have much to learn from each other. Learn from each other, as if humans had something to teach the Dominion. Nari stepped forward with her own device. She had been studying the language patterns in the probe's transmissions. In just 3 days, she had begun to understand their mathematical language. Not perfectly, but enough to ask real questions. How do your ships work? She asked. What makes them glow? Where do you come from? G1 added. How many of you are there? What is it like to travel between stars? Hyunwoo wondered. Questions, questions, questions. They flowed like water from a broken dam, not just about technology but about culture, about philosophy, about what it meant to be alive in a universe full of other thinking beings. Vextar found himself answering. These humans listened carefully to every word. They asked follow-up questions that showed they understood complex ideas quickly. They made connections he had not expected. When he explained how their faster-than-light drives worked, Ji-won immediately asked if the same principles could be used for communication. When he described Dominion society, Hyunwoo wanted to know how they resolved conflicts between different species. When he mentioned their vast territories, Nari wondered how they maintained their culture across such distances. The meeting lasted 8 hours. By the end, Vextar realized he had learned as much from them as they had from him. Their questions made him think about his own civilization in new ways. That should have been the end of it. Standard procedure was to offer them membership in the Dominion as a client species. They would provide raw materials and workers. In return, they would receive protection and technology. But when Vextar made this offer, something unexpected happened again. "Thank you," Ji-won said. "But we have some questions about the arrangement." "Questions. Always questions." "What would happen to our governments?" Hyunwoo asked. "Would we be able to modify your technology?" Nari wondered. "Could we visit other worlds and meet other species?" Ji-won wanted to know. These were not the questions client species usually asked. Usually they wanted to know how much food they would receive, or whether their children would be safe. These humans were thinking about independence, about innovation, about exploration. "You would be protected," Vextar explained. "You would have no need to worry about such things." "But we want to worry about them," Ji-won said. "We want to be part of decisions that affect us. We want to contribute," Hyunwoo added. "We want to help solve problems. We want to grow," Nari finished. "Not just survive." Vextar returned to his ship confused. In 300 years, no species had ever asked to be partners rather than clients. No species had ever suggested they might improve Dominion technology. No species had ever implied that the Dominion way might not be the only way. He reported to the council that the humans were unusual. 3 weeks later, his confusion turned to concern. Human radio transmissions showed they were already building copies of Dominion technology. Not exactly copies, improvements. They had taken the basic principles he had shared and made them work better. Their fusion reactors ran cleaner. Their computers processed faster. Their materials were stronger. "How is this possible?" Council member Zexhan demanded during the emergency session. "They ask questions," Vextar replied. "They ask why things work the way they do. Then they ask if there might be better ways." "Better ways?" Zexhan's voice carried disbelief. "Our technology has been perfected over millennia." "They do not see perfection," Vextar said slowly. "They see possibilities." That was when the council decided the humans needed closer observation. More ships were sent to Earth's system. More probes were deployed. The humans greeted each one with the same curious enthusiasm. They wanted to learn. They wanted to share. They wanted to help. They treated the Dominion not as gods or masters, but as interesting neighbors with advanced tools. And somehow that was the most frightening thing of all. Standing at his window now, 5 years later, Vextar watched Earth spinning peacefully below. Such a small world. Such ordinary-looking beings living on it. But in 5 years they had changed everything. The question was no longer whether the Dominion could conquer the humans. The question was whether the Dominion could survive them. 2 years had passed since first contact, and Vextar thought he understood the human problem. The council had decided to use their standard integration protocol. Give the primitives some basic technology, establish trade agreements, and slowly make them dependent on Dominion resources. Within a generation, they would be loyal client species. It should have worked. It always worked. Minho arrived at the Dominion trade station 3 months after the integration protocol began. He was young for a human negotiator, barely 30 years old. He smiled constantly and asked endless questions about Dominion culture, history, and economics. "I want to understand how this all works," he said to Vextar during their first meeting. "Your empire has lasted so long. You must be doing something right." Vextar appreciated the respect. Finally, a human who understood the natural order. He began explaining the trade system with pride. The Dominion provided advanced technology and protection. Client species provided raw materials and manufactured goods. Simple and efficient. That sounds wonderful, Minho said. But I have a few questions about the rates. The first trade agreement Earth signed was standard. Raw materials at standard rates, finished goods at standard prices, technology transfers at standard intervals. Nothing unusual. But somehow, Minho had negotiated better terms than species with centuries of experience. It started small. A slight increase in payment for rare earth elements. A small discount on medical technology. Access to communication networks that other client species had to pay extra for. How did you do that? Vextar asked him after the signing. I asked what was possible, Minho said simply. You never said no. Within 6 months, other client species were asking why humans got better deals. Vextar explained that Earth had different resources, different needs. The explanation satisfied no one. Then So-Young arrived. She came as part of the technology transfer program. Young human engineers were supposed to learn Dominion technology and implement it on Earth. They were supposed to follow instructions. Exactly. Technology that had worked for thousands of years should not be changed. So-Young did not get that message. She took one look at the antimatter containment systems and immediately started asking questions. Why did they use magnetic fields in that configuration? Had anyone tried crystalline matrices? What about quantum field manipulation? These designs work, the Dominion instructor told her. They have worked for 3,000 years. But do they work well? So-Young asked. Within a week, she had built a small test unit using modified principles. The containment field was more stable and used 30% less energy. This is impossible, the instructor said. Why? So-Young asked. The physics are the same. I just arranged them differently. Word of So-Young's modifications spread quickly through the station. Other human engineers wanted to see her work. More importantly, engineers from other species wanted to see it too. A Velkari engineer named Thex studied So-Young's designs for days. These modifications, he said finally, they could revolutionize our entire power grid. Great, So-Young said. Want to help me make them even better? That was not how technology transfer was supposed to work. Humans were supposed to receive Dominion knowledge gratefully and implement it exactly as designed. They were not supposed to improve it. They certainly were not supposed to share improvements with other species. But that was exactly what happened. So-Young published her modifications on the Galactic Data Network. She included full technical specifications, theoretical background, and step-by-step implementation guides. She made them freely available to anyone who wanted them. Why? Vextar asked her. You could have sold this technology, made Earth wealthy. Knowledge. Shared is knowledge multiplied, So-Young said. If everyone uses better technology, everyone benefits. This was not how the galaxy worked. Technology was power. Power was carefully controlled. Knowledge was a resource to be managed and distributed only to those who earned it. But So-Young's improvements were too good to ignore. Within months, Dominion ships were retrofitting their engines with human modifications. Containment fields across the galaxy became more efficient. Energy costs dropped, and other species began asking uncomfortable questions. If humans could improve Dominion technology so easily, what else could be improved? If modifications could be shared freely, why did they usually cost so much? If young engineers could make such discoveries, why did technology development move so slowly? Jae-hyun made things worse. He came to study Dominion culture and society. Anthropology, humans called it. The study of how different beings organized themselves. Vextar thought it was harmless academic curiosity. Jae-hyun spent months observing life on the trade station. He watched how different species interacted. He studied the hierarchy systems. He analyzed resource distribution patterns. He asked questions about everything. Your system is very stable, he told Vextar after 6 months of observation. But have you considered that it might be too stable? Stability is strength, Vextar replied. Order prevents chaos. But it also prevents growth, Jae-hyun said. Your society has barely changed in 3,000 years. Is that really good? Vextar had never considered that stability might be a problem. The Dominion worked. It had always worked. Why change something that worked? Look at resource allocation, Jae-hyun continued, showing him charts and graphs. Core worlds receive the best technology and resources. Border worlds provide raw materials but receive little investment. This creates a permanent class system. That is the natural order, Vextar said. Is it? Jae-hyun asked. What if border worlds had better technology? What if their people had better education? What if they could contribute more than just raw materials? That would upset the balance. Or, it might create a better balance. Jae-hyun's questions spread like a virus through the station. Engineers from border worlds began asking why they could not access advanced training. Scientists from client species wondered why they could not contribute to research projects. Administrators questioned resource distribution policies. The human is causing disruption, Council member Zexhan complained. His ideas are spreading to other species. He is only asking questions, Vextar replied. Questions that challenge the order we have built over millennia. But the questions would not stop. Worse, they were producing results. Minho had taught other species how to negotiate better trade agreements. Suddenly, every renewal negotiation became complicated. Client species wanted better terms, more technology access, greater representation in trade decisions. So-young's approach to technology sharing had inspired other engineers. Research projects that used to take decades were being completed in years. Innovations were spreading rapidly instead of being carefully controlled. Jae-hyun's analysis of social structures had prompted reforms on 12 different worlds. Some species were experimenting with more representative governments. Others were investing more in education and infrastructure for their border populations. The humans are destroying everything, Zexhan said during an emergency council session. Their ideas are spreading chaos throughout our territory. Is it chaos? Vextar asked. Or is it change? Change leads to instability. Instability leads to war. But that was not what was happening. The species adopting human ideas were becoming more productive, not less. Their economies were growing. Their populations were happier. Their loyalty to the Dominion was actually increasing as they felt more fairly treated. The problem was not that human ideas were causing chaos. The problem was that they were working. 3 client species had formally requested permission to send their own people to study with humans. 2 border worlds had asked to implement Earth-style education systems. 1 entire sector had adopted So-young's technology-sharing protocols. And everywhere human ideas spread, beings began asking the same dangerous question. Why do things have to be this way? Vextar found himself asking the same question. He had spent 300 years accepting that the Dominion way was the only way, but humans showed that other ways were possible, better ways. Standing in his quarters late at night looking at reports of improved efficiency, increased innovation, and growing prosperity in human-influenced regions, Vextar began to understand the real threat. Humans were not trying to conquer the Dominion, they were trying to improve it. And somehow that was far more dangerous than any army. The council would meet tomorrow to discuss the human problem. Vextar already knew what they would decide. Humans were too disruptive. Their influence was too dangerous. Something would have to be done. But as he looked at the data showing unprecedented growth and innovation wherever human ideas had taken root, Vextar wondered if the problem was not the humans. Maybe the problem was the Dominion itself. The council had made its decision. 3 years of human disruption was enough. Order needed to be restored. The humans would learn their proper place in the galaxy, or they would be removed from it entirely. Vextar stood on the bridge of the Yar, Warfleet's command ship, as they approached Earth's solar system. 50 Dominion vessels, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. It should have been a simple demonstration of power. Show the humans what real force looked like. Make them understand their position. But nothing about humans was ever simple. Admiral Dongyan was waiting for them. The human fleet was laughably small by Dominion standards. 20 ships, mostly converted civilian vessels with jury-rigged weapons and mismatched armor plating. They looked like they had been built in someone's garage rather than a proper shipyard. Fleet Commander Yextor opened communications with standard protocol. Project overwhelming power, demand immediate surrender, offer merciful terms for compliance. Human vessels, his voice boomed across space. You face the might of the Dominion. Stand down immediately, or be destroyed. The response came back in a calm, almost friendly voice. This is Admiral Dongyun of Earth Defense Force. Thank you for the warning. We're not planning to surrender, but we appreciate you being so polite about the whole thing. Yextor stared at the communication display. Did he just thank me for threatening him? I believe so, sir, his communications officer replied. And he said no? Politely, sir. This was not how these encounters usually went. Client species either surrendered immediately or made desperate last stands. They did not treat invasion fleets like inconvenient neighbors. All ships, Yextor commanded. Advance in battle formation. Prepare to disable their vessels. The Dominion. Fleet moved forward in perfect coordination. 50 ships in precise formation, weapons charged, shields at maximum. It was a display that had broken the will of 1,000 worlds. The human ships scattered like startled fish. But they did not flee. Instead, they moved in seemingly random patterns that made no tactical sense. Some ships accelerated toward the Dominion fleet. Others curved away in wide arcs. Several disappeared behind asteroids. What are they doing? Yextor demanded. Unknown, sir. Their movements appear chaotic. Target the largest vessel. Disable their engines. The Dominion ships fired their precision weapons, designed to cripple without destroying. But the human ships were no longer where the targeting computers expected them to be. They're moving unpredictably, the weapons officer reported. Their flight patterns don't match any known tactical doctrine. Donghyun's voice came over communications again. Sorry about the wild flying. We're still learning how to do this properly. Yeji says the computer models work better in practice than theory. Yeji. Vextar had heard that name in intelligence reports. A young human who designed tactical programs using something called artificial intelligence. Their computers could think and adapt in real time. Adapt to what? Yextor asked his tactical officer. To us, sir. Their computers are learning our patterns and adjusting their responses. This was impossible. Battle computers followed programmed routines. They executed predetermined strategies based on sensor data and tactical databases. They did not learn during combat. But the human ships were moving like they could predict Dominion actions before they happened. They avoided weapon locks by microseconds. They appeared in blind spots that should not have existed. They used gravitational fields and asteroid formations in ways that violated every rule of space combat. Sir, the sensor officer called out. Multiple human fighters approaching from various vectors. Fighters? Yextor looked at the display. Against capital ships? The human fighters were tiny compared to Dominion vessels. Single-seat craft that looked more like racing vehicles than military hardware. They should have been vaporized by defensive fire the moment they came within range. But they were not flying like normal fighters either. Xiongmin led the fighter squadron in what could only be described as aggressive asteroid surfing. His small craft used the gravitational pull of space rocks to slingshot around Dominion ships at impossible angles. His squadron followed, each pilot finding their own chaotic path through the battlefield. How are they moving like that? Yextor demanded. They appeared to be using modified mining equipment, the analysis officer reported. Gravity anchors, momentum redistributors, emergency thruster arrays. All civilian technology. Civilian technology cannot perform those maneuvers. Tell that to them, sir. Xiongmin's fighters were not trying to destroy Dominion ships. They were attaching devices to their hulls. Small machines that looked harmless but immediately began interfering with ship systems. Sir, we're experiencing communication disruptions. Navigational computers are showing errors. Weapon targeting systems are offline. The devices were not weapons. They were sophisticated jammers and system disruptors that made Dominion ships fight blind and deaf. Worse, they were clearly improvised from common technology that any spacefaring species could build. How long to clear those devices from our hulls? Yextor asked. Unknown, sir. They appear to be self-replicating and adaptive. Each time we neutralize one, it changes its approach. Vexitar watched from his observation post as the battle continued. It was unlike anything in 3,000 years of Dominion military history. The humans were not trying to win through superior firepower or better armor. They were making war economically unsustainable. Every shot the Dominion fired cost energy and ammunition. Every maneuver required fuel and calculations. Every system disruption required time and resources to repair. The humans were turning warfare into a resource management problem. And they were very good at managing resources efficiently. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "Admiral Dong Yun is requesting to speak with you." "Put him through," Yextor said grimly. "Hello again." Dong Yun's cheerful voice filled the bridge. "We've been thinking about this whole situation and we have a proposal." "You are in no position to make proposals," Yextor replied. "Well, we're not in a position to win either," Dong Yun admitted. "Your ships are much better than ours. But we can keep this going for quite a while, and it's getting expensive for everyone." Expensive, as if war was a business transaction. "What are you proposing?" Vextar found himself asking. "A competition instead of a battle. We pick a problem that needs solving and we see who can solve it better. Loser accepts the winner's terms." "What kind of problem?" "There's a damaged space station in the Kepler system. Life support failing, people trapped inside. Whoever can rescue them faster and more efficiently wins." Yextor looked at Vextar. This was not standard military procedure. But the humans had already demonstrated that standard procedures did not work against them. "And if we refuse? Then we keep doing this dance until one of us runs out of resources. But people are dying on that station while we play war games." The rescue mission became legendary in Dominion military academies, though not for reasons anyone expected. The Dominion task force approached the damaged station with overwhelming force and advanced technology. They had rescue ships, medical facilities, and engineering teams capable of handling any emergency. The human response team consisted of Seung Min and a handful of modified mining vessels. The Dominion ships docked properly and began systematic evacuation procedures. Medical teams processed casualties in order of severity. Engineering crews worked to stabilize critical systems. Seungmin's team threw mining grapples around entire sections of the station and began pulling them apart. They used industrial cutting tools to create new escape routes. They turned cargo, containers into emergency shelters, and mining robots into rescue workers. It was chaotic, improvised, and completely against every safety regulation in the galaxy. It also worked. While Dominion teams evacuated people through proper airlock procedures, human teams were cutting new holes and pulling people out 10 at a time. While Dominion engineers tried to repair the station's life support, human miners were installing temporary atmospheric processors in every available space. The humans rescued twice as many people in half the time, using equipment that cost a fraction of Dominion technology. "How?" Yextor asked when it was over. "We stopped thinking about how things should work," Seungmin explained, "and started thinking about how to make things work. The rescue mission changed everything." Word spread quickly through the fleet about human efficiency and innovation. Other species began asking why Dominion rescue procedures were so slow and expensive. Why did it take so long to get approval for emergency modifications? Why were regulations more important than results? "They are making us look incompetent," Yextor complained to Vextar. "Are we incompetent?" Vextar asked. "Of course not. We follow proper procedures. And if proper procedures do not work?" Yextor had no answer. The war fleet returned to Dominion space without achieving its objectives. The humans had not been conquered or intimidated. Instead, they had demonstrated that Dominion military superiority was largely an illusion. More dangerous, they had shown other species that Dominion methods were not the only methods. That innovation could triumph over tradition. That thinking differently could produce better results. The military campaign had been intended to put humans in their place. Instead, it had raised questions about whether the Dominion deserved its place at all. The military failure had shaken the Council, but they still believed the Dominion was fundamentally strong. Wars could be lost while civilizations endured. The real threat to their empire came not from human weapons or tactics, but from human ideas. And ideas, Vextar learned, were far more dangerous than armies. It started with Sunwoo. He was a human philosopher who had come to study Dominion society as part of a cultural exchange program. Most species sent their scientists or engineers for such programs. Humans sent a thinker. Sunwoo attended lectures at the Galactic Academy on the core world of Nexus Prime. He sat quietly in the back of lecture halls, taking notes and asking occasional questions. The professors found him pleasant but unremarkable. Then he began giving lectures of his own. The Nature of Authority was the title of his first presentation. Vextar attended out of curiosity, expecting standard academic discussion about power, structures, and social organization. Instead, Sunwoo asked a simple question: "Why do you obey?" "I beg your pardon?" asked Professor Yelmoth, a distinguished political theorist. "Why do you obey your superiors? Why do your superiors obey the council? Why does anyone obey anyone?" "Because that is how society functions," Yelmoth replied. "Order requires hierarchy." "But why this hierarchy?" Sunwoo continued. "Why these particular beings in these particular positions? What makes them qualified to rule over others?" The lecture hall grew uncomfortable. These were not questions usually asked in polite academic settings. "They are qualified by birth, by tradition, by the natural order," Yelmoth explained. "Natural order?" Sunwoo smiled. "What if I told you that on Earth our leaders are chosen by the people they lead? That authority comes not from birth or tradition, but from demonstrated competence and popular consent?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Representatives from a dozen species exchanged glances. This was not how civilized societies worked. "Impossible," Yelmoth said. "The masses cannot choose their leaders. They lack the wisdom and education." "Then why not give them wisdom and education?" Sunwoo asked. "Why not make leadership something anyone can earn through merit rather than inheritance?" The lecture should have ended there. Sunwoo's ideas should have been dismissed as primitive human nonsense. But the questions he raised would not go away. Students began discussing earned authority versus inherited power. They compared their own societies to human democracy. They wondered why their leaders never had to prove their competence to those they governed. Within weeks, recordings of Sunwoo's lectures were spreading across the galactic network. Not just to academics, but to ordinary beings on ordinary worlds who had never questioned why they followed orders from people they had never chosen. Minji made things worse. She was a social scientist who came to document Dominion society for Human Archives. Where Sunwoo asked philosophical questions about authority, Minji asked practical questions about efficiency. She studied resource allocation patterns. She analyzed productivity data. She compared different worlds within the Dominion and asked why some prospered while others struggled. Her findings were devastating. "Your core worlds," she explained to a gathering of administrators, "receive 90% of advanced technology and educational resources. Your border worlds provide 80% of raw materials, but receive minimal investment in infrastructure or development. That is the natural division of labor," Administrative Director Kexval replied. "Core worlds require advanced resources to maintain their technological capabilities." "But what if border worlds had those same capabilities?" Minji asked. "What if you invested in their education and infrastructure? What if they could contribute more than just raw materials?" "That would be expensive." "Would it?" Minji showed them her calculations. Earth's economic models suggest that investment in border world development would increase overall productivity by 60% within 2 generations. "Your models are theoretical. Would you like to test them?" The test began on a single border world called Veltar 9. It was chosen because it was small, unimportant, and expected to produce minimal results. The experiment would prove that human economic theories did not work in practice. Minji worked with local administrators to implement basic reforms. Educational programs were expanded. Infrastructure was improved. Local beings were given more authority over their own resource management. Within a year, Veltar 9's productivity had increased by 40%. Within 2 years, they were developing their own technological innovations. Within 3 years, they were providing advanced manufactured goods instead of just raw materials. Other border worlds took notice. They began asking why they could not have similar programs. Core world administrators found themselves explaining why investment in education had to remain centralized when clear evidence showed that decentralization worked better. Wu Jin delivered the final blow to traditional thinking. He was an engineer who had become a teacher. Instead of working on advanced projects for human colonies, he chose to establish technical schools on Dominion worlds. He wanted to share human engineering principles with other species. Dominion education was based on memorization and rigid adherence to established procedures. Students learned what had always been done and were taught to do it the same way. Innovation was discouraged because it disrupted proven systems. Wu Jin's schools were different. Students were taught to question everything. They learned basic principles and were encouraged to find new applications. They were given problems without predetermined solutions and told to figure things out. "This is chaos," complained Education Minister Texawan after visiting one of Wu Jin's schools. "Students are arguing with instructors. They are proposing modifications to established designs. They have no respect for authority." "They have respect for truth," Wu Jin replied. "If their ideas work better than old ideas, shouldn't we use them?" The students from Wu Jin's schools graduated and took jobs throughout the Dominion. They brought with them a dangerous habit of asking why and what if about everything they encountered. Suddenly, engineering projects that had taken decades were being completed in years. Manufacturing processes were being improved by workers instead of just managers. Problems that had been considered unsolvable were being approached from new angles, but the real damage came when these graduates began teaching others. Wu Jin's method spread like a virus through technical communities. Engineers who had followed the same procedures for centuries began experimenting with alternatives. Workers who had never been asked for their opinions began suggesting improvements. Humans are destroying our civilization," Council member Zexhan declared during an emergency session. "Their ideas are spreading chaos throughout our territory." "Is it chaos?" Vextar asked, reviewing the productivity reports. "Manufacturing efficiency is up 30%. Innovation is at an all-time high. Client species are more satisfied with Dominion rule than they have been in centuries." "They are questioning authority," Zexhan insisted. "They are demanding representation in decisions that affect them. They are expecting their leaders to prove their competence instead of simply accepting inherited position. And that is bad, because it undermines everything we have built." But what they had built, Vextar was beginning to realize, was not as strong as they had believed. The Dominion had maintained power through control of information, technology, and opportunity. When humans freely shared all three, that control began to crumble. 3 client species had formally requested permission to implement human-style educational systems. 5 border worlds had asked for representation in council decisions that affected their territories. 2 entire sectors had adopted Wu Jin's engineering principles and were producing innovations that surpassed core world technology. The philosophical virus was spreading faster than any physical contagion. Beings across the galaxy were asking the same dangerous questions that humans asked. Why do things have to be this way? What if there were better ways? Who decided that these people should rule over those people? "We must stop this," Zexhan demanded. "Ban human teachers, restrict their access to our worlds, quarantine their ideas before they destroy us completely." "Can you quarantine an idea?" Vextar asked. "Can you unlearn something once it has been learned?" The damage was already done. Hundreds of thousands of beings had been exposed to human concepts of democratic authority, economic investment, and educational innovation. They had seen these ideas work in practice. They could not simply be ordered to forget. More dangerous, other species were beginning to implement these ideas without human involvement. They were creating their own versions of democratic systems, educational reforms, and economic development programs. The humans had not conquered the Dominion through force. They had given everyone else the tools to rebuild it according to human principles. Late at night in his quarters, Vextar studied reports from across the galaxy. Everywhere human ideas had taken root, societies were becoming more productive, more innovative, more prosperous. Beings who had never questioned their circumstances were demanding better treatment, better opportunities, better leadership. It was not revolution in the traditional sense. There were no armies marching on core worlds, no declarations of independence, no violent uprisings. The end came not with war or revolution, but with a vote. 5 years after first contact, the Dominion Council faced a crisis unlike any in their 3,000-year history. Half their client species were demanding representation in galactic government. Border worlds had formed economic alliances that bypassed traditional trade routes. Core worlds were experiencing worker strikes led by graduates of human-influenced schools. The empire was not collapsing from external pressure. It was transforming from internal change. "We have 3 options," Council member Zexhan announced, during what would be their final emergency session. "We can use military force to restore order, we can grant limited reforms to satisfy the dissidents, or we can—" He paused, struggling with the words. "We can accept human proposals for fundamental change." Military force was no longer viable. The failed campaign against Earth had shown that human-inspired tactics and technologies could neutralize Dominion advantages. Worse, using force against their own client species would likely trigger the galactic civil war they sought to avoid. Limited reforms had already failed. Every concession made to human-influenced groups led to demands for greater changes. There was no middle ground between traditional hierarchy and human democracy. That left the third option, accepting that the humans had been right all along. "Absolutely not," Zexhan declared. "We cannot simply abandon 3 millennia of civilization because some primitive species has new ideas. Can we afford not to?" Vextar asked quietly. He had been asking himself that question for months as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Regions that adopted human ideas were thriving. Productivity was up. Innovation was accelerating. Even crime rates were dropping, as beings gained more control over their own lives. Meanwhile, traditional Dominion core worlds were stagnating. Their rigid hierarchies could not adapt to rapid change. Their educational systems produced graduates who could not compete with human-trained engineers. Their economies were being outpaced by more flexible border world alliances. "If we do nothing," Vextar continued, "we will be irrelevant within a generation. If we resist change, we will be overthrown. Our only choice is to lead the transformation, or be swept away by it." The debate raged for days. Ancient traditions versus practical results. Proven stability versus uncertain innovation. The familiar comfort of absolute authority versus the frightening democracy of shared power. In the end, it was not philosophy that decided the issue. It was mathematics. Economic projections showed that Dominion GDP would decline by 60% within 10 years if current trends continued. Military assessments indicated that they could not maintain control over rebellious territories without destroying the economic base that supported their power. Social analysis suggested that traditional hierarchy was simply not sustainable in HFY, a galaxy where everyone had access to human ideas about equality and self-determination. The Dominion could evolve or die. There was no third option. Hana arrived 3 months later as Earth's representative to the Constitutional Convention. She was younger than most diplomats, but she carried with her something unprecedented, a framework for galactic democracy that had been tested and refined on dozens of human-influenced worlds. "We're not here to replace your civilization," she told the assembled delegates on the first day. "We're here to help you improve it." The convention lasted 8 months. Representatives from 200 worlds debated everything from voting procedures to resource allocation. Humans like Hana facilitated discussions but refused to dominate them. They offered suggestions, shared Earth's experiences, and helped other species find solutions that worked for their particular circumstances. Junho, Earth's economic advisor, helped design new trade systems based on voluntary cooperation rather than hierarchical control. Instead of core worlds extracting resources from periphery regions, all participants would benefit from mutual economic development. Yunji, a systems analyst, redesigned galactic governance structures to balance local autonomy with coordinated decision-making. No single species or world could control others, but they could work together on common challenges. The humans refused all leadership positions in the new system. When offered the presidency of the Galactic Cooperative, Hana politely declined. "When I didn't do this to rule anyone," she explained. "We did it because ruling people is wrong. The whole point is that everyone gets to participate." The transition was remarkably peaceful. The Dominion Council voted to dissolve itself and transfer authority to the new democratic institutions. Some core world elites objected, but they were outnumbered by beings who had seen the benefits of human-inspired changes. Vextar found himself in an unexpected position. Instead of being a council member ruling over client species, he became an ambassador representing his people in a system where everyone was equal. "How does it feel?" Hana asked him during the closing ceremony. "Going from ruler to representative?" "Terrifying," Vextar admitted. "For 300 years, I made decisions for others. Now I have to convince them that my ideas are worth supporting." "That's democracy," Hana smiled. "Harder than dictatorship, but more honest." The first years of the Galactic Cooperative were chaotic. Learning democracy was like learning to walk again after a lifetime of being carried. Debates were messy. Decisions took longer. Some policies failed and had to be revised, but progress was undeniable. Innovation flourished when beings could pursue their own ideas instead of following predetermined plans. Economic growth accelerated as resources flowed to where they were most needed rather than where tradition dictated. Social problems that had festered under hierarchical rule were addressed by people who actually experienced them. Most importantly, the galaxy became more peaceful. When beings could vote out leaders they disliked, they had less reason to resort to violence. When economic opportunities were available to everyone, there was less competition for scarce resources. "The humans saved us from ourselves," Vextar wrote in his final report as the last council member of the Dominion. "Not through conquest, but through example. They showed us that our way was not the only way, and that other ways could be better." Years later, as Ambassador Vextar prepared for another democratic election, he reflected on the transformation that humans had brought to the galaxy. They had arrived as primitives and left them all more civilized. The humans had never wanted to rule the galaxy. They had wanted to improve it, and in the end, that made all the difference. The old Dominion was gone, replaced by something unprecedented. A galaxy of free beings working together by choice, rather than compulsion. It was messy, complicated, and constantly changing. It was also the most prosperous and peaceful era in galactic history. Vextar often wondered what would have happened if the Dominion had simply destroyed humanity during first contact. Would the galaxy still be trapped in 3,000 years of unchanging hierarchy? Would innovation still be suppressed in favor of stability? Would billions of beings still live without hope of bettering their circumstances? The thought chilled him, not because of what they had lost, but because of what they had almost failed to gain. In trying to control the humans, the Dominion had learned that control itself was the problem. In trying to preserve their civilization, they had discovered that preservation required transformation. The humans had collapsed their empire not through superior force, but through superior ideas. They had conquered not with weapons, but with the radical notion that everyone deserved freedom, opportunity, and respect. And somehow being conquered by such beings felt like victory. Looking out at the stars from his office window, Vextar smiled. Somewhere out there, humans were probably asking new questions, proposing new improvements, challenging new assumptions. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be.